Hello, and welcome to Better Than Art School. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about what formal concepts are. Okay, so in the last lecture, I talked about form and content. So content is what you're trying to say. Form is the way you're trying to say it. It's a style that you use. It's the materials that you use. And so formal elements are elements that make up the form, or that pertain to the form. Okay, so if you remember from the last lecture, a formal concern is not what you're saying. It's like art teachers don't tell you what you can and can't paint. They tell you how better to get across what you're trying to get across. You know, besides assigning a certain assignment, they're not going to tell you, oh, you should never paint, you know, baby pigs or whatever. They're not going to tell you what you can't do. What they're going to tell you is like, what's the best way to express this idea that you're trying to get across. So those are formal ideas. So don't be intimidated by formal ideas. They're just ideas that pertain to the form. And so these are the formal elements. And there's other ones that we're not going to discuss until later. But for now, we're going to talk about line, value, shape, and texture. So those are four very common formal ideas. Okay, so line, I think everybody knows what line is. But it's a mark or stroke that describes the edge and implied qualities of objects and spaces. It varies by length, direction, width. Okay, so a line can get really thin and then really thick. It can be playful. It can be like when somebody dies and the meter kind of flat lines, or you can do a lot with the line. You can express a lot with the line. And in this picture, this sketchbook page, this open sketchbook page by James Jean, he's using all kinds of lines, and there's a lot of rhythms, and there's a lot of kind of movement through the line. And you can think of a line as a point in motion, so it's just a point that goes on a walk. It's kind of a geometric way to think about it. It's a series of adjacent points that kind of form in our mind to all kind of be seen as one thing, which would be the line. It's a connection between points. So you have 2 points and you draw a line between them. That's an easy one. Or an implied connection between points. If you think about the constellations, how we take these stars that are whatever thousands of light years away from each other, and we link them together and they become a picture of a chariot or something like that. Okay, so here's some things that a line can do. You can activate a space. You can, if an area of your picture is getting really boring, you can just add some diagonal lines to it, and it kind of brings it back to life. You can define a shape, like this little bit of the shore is defined by the line here. You can create a bridge between visual elements. So what's happening now versus what's about to happen. She's about to get clobbered by the wave. So those are some things you can do with lines. Okay, and then what lines do universally for almost every art form is they can plan out something, or architecture, or any kind of design. You can plan it with line, right? So if it's a storyboard for a movie or sketches for a sculpture, whatever, you can kind of plan it with line. It's a really economical way to do that. So in the picture on the left, it's planning for a painting done with charcoal lines and then painted over with oil paint. And the one on the right, what's interesting about the one on the right here is that it's just line, right? But the line tells you so much information. It tells, okay, here's a woman, she's walking with a heavy saucer full of liquid that she's trying not to spill. That's a lot of information to get across with just a few lines, right? Okay, so that brings us to line networks. And so strictly speaking, the most common line networks are hatching and cross-hatching. Hatching is usually light directional. So if the light's up here, you'll hatch away from the light. Cross-hatching is form directional, or it might start out light directional, but then you come back over it with a crosshatch, and it's going form directionally. So it's like the topography of the surface that you're describing. So these are two really common ways to slowly build from line to value, which brings us to value. Okay, so value is the relative lightness or darkness of a surface. The word relative is really important, okay? Because if you want to make something look really bright, you have to keep all the other colors around it really dark, okay? So using value well, you use it comparatively, okay? And when you're drawing a picture and you're bring into full value, eventually all the lines turn into value edges. So instead of having a line here, you just have a dark edge where this is in front of that, right? All right, so if you use strong value change, it's called contrast, and it creates drama, right? So this looks like it's stage lit. It's a picture by Artemisia Gentileschi, and she's telling the story of Judith slaying Holofernes. She's cutting off his head, and that's not something that happens every day, so it's very dramatic, right? Whereas this is something that's very calming, right? And a musical analogy to this would be like if you hit a really high note on a stringed instrument or any instrument and you hit a really low note, that's going to feel dramatic. But if you hit notes right next to each other, then that's going to be much more calming, right? So it's the same thing in art. If you use values really disparate from each other and really close to each other at the same time, that creates a sense of drama. And then you use values really close to each other, that creates a sense of calm. Okay, so you can abstract to emphasize value. You can abstract to emphasize any of these things, really. If you think about it, it's like being at a recording board. If you're recording music, you can bring up the bass, you can bring down the treble, you can bring down the drums, whatever. So you can emphasize all of these and bring down the other levels in a way. So on the one on the left here, it's this woman reading a book, and it's almost all about value. It's not really about the lines, it's not really about texture or anything else. It's really a value study. Okay, so shape. This is a New York artist named Inka Eisenhai, and what she's doing is kind of interesting because she's taking these flat shapes that don't have a gradient to them, but laying them down in a certain way, and it feels like space, even though the shape is just a flat shape. Okay, so if you enclose an object, that's a shape, right? And then if you make that object seem like it has dimension to it, that is that's like a volume, right? So a circle is a shape, a sphere is a volume. Okay. Okay, so shapes are also the easiest way to start to build space in a picture. So the most simple way to build, the most simple form of space in pictures, figure and ground, or positive and negative. So you have something and then you have the background, right? That's foreground. So instead of like foreground, middle ground, background, which would be 3 layers of space, where you'd have something close to you, something in the middle, something far back. In figure ground, you just have 2. You just have one thing in the background, right? And in this, on the left, Batman is the figure and the penguin is the ground. And then on the one on the right, it's the reverse. Now Batman is the background and penguin is the figure. Okay, so here's some ways you can create shapes. This is my dog, Calliope. You can enclose an area with a continuous line. That's probably the most easy way to create a shape. You can fill in an area with a solid color, value, or texture. Or you can surround a shape with other shapes and you create a de facto shape. So if you move into a house and all your neighbors have already built fences, hey, you don't have to build a fence because it's already there for you. Okay, so now texture. All right, in this drawing by Stephen Essel, it's just a riot of different textures, right? Her hair, the furry thing, the piercings, everything. Okay, so here's an example where the white walls are very flat and atextural, you might say, or very low texture. And then you have these bobcats and wolves coming in, and they're very furry, so it creates this contrast where you really notice the textures. But texture is basically just the surface quality of a 2-dimensional shape or 3-dimensional volume. So physical texture might be like the kind of tooth that your paper has or the surface that you're making your art on. And then there's also visual texture or the illusion of texture, which is like creating the illusion of fuzziness or shininess or whatever it is through the skillful manipulation with your materials. So texture is great for making something feel realistic and plausible. And in this painting by Rembrandt, what he did for the sleeve is he grinded up little gems and mixed it in with the paint, and then the light hits the painting and suddenly it looks luminous and beautiful and it looks real in a certain way. Okay, you can also create a visceral impact. This is a sculptor named Ron Mueck, and making this baby feel very, it's a huge baby, of course. It's bigger than your average baby. But the hair looks like hair and the skin looks like skin. So all those textures work together to create something really visceral. Okay, so you can also abstract, like in all of these things, you can abstract to emphasize the texture. So the texture could come from the thing itself, or you can add a new texture. So like normally we wouldn't expect a cup and spoon to have fur on it, but that emphasized the texture. And then this portrait by Chuck Close is the same kind of thing. It's textures that you wouldn't normally see, and that kind of calls attention to the texture. And there's two puppies eating cat or something. And I will see you next time.